Dr. Smith. Maybe a couple of seconds and I will.
Hi, I'm Selwyn Manning and you are watching A View from Afar. And as always, we are joined by political scientist and former Pentagon analyst Paul Buchanan. And this week, we will discuss how the United States polls indicate it's increasingly less probable for Donald Trump to be re-elected as the President of the United States. But what are the immediate dangers facing the United States in this pre-vote period? Right now, it appears there's a severe test of the United States political institutions. The election is being delegitimized. The military brass is on quarantine, and Trump's behaviour is even more erratic. So how is the United States' national security being compromised, and will the United States' adversaries around the world react? But first, here's an introduction and an invitation. To those of you who are joining us live, if you are joining us via YouTube, Twitter or and Facebook, feel free to make comments, and if you do, we'll be able to include your interaction in the program. So let's cross to Paul, who is waiting online for a bit of a deep dive into these big global issues. Good afternoon, Paul.
Good afternoon, Selwyn. How are you doing?
Well, it's certainly a big agenda that we're going to be getting through this afternoon. So what do you make in the first instance of exactly the United States' situation in this, where Trump is still he's still contagious, isn't he? And he's back in the White House. He's saying it's back to business as usual. I'm going to work. He's got his mask off. What are all these signals suggesting to you?
Well, there's two aspects to the broader picture that the last 7 days have brought into very harsh relief. On the domestic side, the United States is now in a full institutional crisis. It's a crisis that's been long in the making, but it's now a crisis that actually affects the business model of the United States, US-style capitalism, in the sense that you have Congress trying to get through a stimulus package that the economy desperately needs, and it now will be held up by a president who is increasingly behaving erratically as a result not only of contracting COVID, but of the medications that have been given to him. And so you have, the extension of this crisis is not just in the political institutions, although I should point out that yet again, Republican-controlled the Senate in Congress has yet to say anything about this erratic behavior, and the logjams still continue. Your mention of the military brass is in fact quite alarming, because all of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, save one, not just the chiefs themselves, but their deputies, are all now in quarantine. And that raises an issue about competence, because the suspicion is that one of them contracted the disease or was exposed to the disease. If you remember, the chair of the Joint Staff, Mark Miley, has been seen in the White House regularly without a mask.
Yeah.
And whereas the other service chiefs and whatnot have worn masks regularly in the Pentagon and elsewhere. And so what that does is it raises the possibility of a fissure within the military high command. And so on the one hand, we have all these institutional weaknesses being exposed. I mean, I won't even get into the fact that U.S. medicine focuses more on palliative care than preventative care, and is dominated by the search for quick fixes in the form of vaccines, rather than, and then of course is insurance-based to boot. All of that now has come to a head, and what that does on an external level is raise the possibility that adversaries of the United States might see this moment of institutional weakness as an opportunity to press their advantage in areas where the United States cannot respond.
Well, let's park that for slightly later on, and we'll get into that in more depth, and because it certainly warrants some obviously solid investigation and analysis of it. If we're getting back to that part that you identified there, that the United States military, its brass, its leadership is in quarantine, that there's a certain amount of finger pointing amongst them, and also obviously from the executive as well. Where is that? What effect is that having on the whole government apparatus from the point of view of its United States national security? And plus, where is Donald Trump on this? Is he beyond competent at this stage to be able to actually get the United States through the next 4 weeks from the point of view of stabilizing these threats that it may perceive it has?
Well, the problems with the military high command are emblematic of problems throughout the U.S. federal government, where you have political appointees increasingly at odds with career public servants over the way they should handle, particularly the pandemic, but the affairs of state. I mean, I'll give you, for instance, it turns out in the State Department, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has waged a low-grade but nevertheless intense campaign against the Pope, of all things.
Well, that's just bizarre. I mean, of all places, why would Pompeo put the Pope in their sights at this stage?
Well, and again, this tells you Pompeo is a devout Catholic.
Yeah.
And the Pope is considered to be a member of the quote-unquote progressive wing of the Roman Catholic Church. And Pompeo is a member of the conservative wing, a wing that includes such nefarious organizations as Opus Dei, which in other parts of the world have been engaged in very unpleasant activities. And Pompeo has turned the bully pulpit of Secretary of State into a partisan vehicle. And part of this is to advance the president's agenda amongst evangelicals and other moral conservatives.
Yeah. I get it.
Okay, so he's pushing that line. Well, it has no place in diplomacy, none whatsoever.
So this is about getting the Bible Belt, the Protestant Bible Belt in the United States, to get across back onto Trump's side when they're obviously being leveraged away because of concerns of his handling on so many different issues. I mean, from the point of view of we've got a comment that's come in from Kevin Hester here, and I'll bring it into the program because this is obviously on a lot of people's minds relating to this. And Kevin says, will Donald J. Trump start a war, either civil or foreign, to cause a distraction and possibly invoke martial law? Now, I think Kevin's hit on a lot of things that people think about in this period. If Donald Trump is really beyond, the probabilities of winning this, and he is erratic at best, can he do that kind of thing? Speaking to that concern of obviously concerned people watching this whole thing, is he able to do that, or do you think that they're in such disarray he doesn't have the influence over the military apparatus, even if 2 weeks ago is he rendered hapless in that type of scenario?
Well, the latter is correct, and thanks, Kevin, for the question. Let me back up just a wee bit in order to answer more fully. First point of order: he still controls the nuclear codes.
Yeah.
His behavior is alarming, to say the least. Now, it turns out the steroids that he's on are not the type of anabolic steroids that you see with weightlifters and athletes.
No, the corticosteroids, yeah.
Right. So it doesn't cause the roid rage that we've often heard about. But nevertheless, it alters your consciousness.
I'll just speak to that point there, Paul, because many people would be privy to people or themselves having taken prednisone for various good reasons relating to their health, prescribed by their physician, of course. Dexamethasone, of which Donald Trump has been getting with respect to this, is something in that corticosteroid toolbox that clinicians around the world have found can be effective at a particular time. And then obviously it's a delicate timeline on that. If they give it too early, it can suppress one's immune system and COVID can get away on you. But if they do it at a particular time where it reduces inflammation, then COVID doesn't have the same effect in having internal bleeds and really attacking that kind of thing. So that seems to be Obviously, I'm not a doctor, but that seems to be from an ordinary person's point of view where Trump is in that space. But those who have been on prednisone or corticosteroids, dexamethasone for any given time, well know that they have lack of sleep, that their dream state when they are asleep becomes even more acute. It can actually cause a person to have trigger responses at best. And I've had it myself, and I know that trigger response relating to your reactions is heightened. And in some cases, look for Trump. If he's got a slight shake, he will be in that particular type of thing. So what does all of that suggest to you from the point of view? Is it time for, let's put it another way, is it time for Pence to actually step in?
Well, therein lies the rub, because you'd think that given that his normal behavior is a bit erratic, that measures would be put in place to prevent him from doing anything seriously foolish for partisan electoral reasons. I mean, he's not thinking anymore about the national interest. He's thinking about the fact that he's losing badly in this electoral contest. Now, you will have noted, Selwyn, and again, in response to Kevin's question, no one's really brought up seriously the 25th Amendment. If ever there was a case to at least trial it, it would be this man, who both mentally and physically may be incapable of discharging the duties of the office. And yet, it's not even broached because I guess it simply his partisans in cabinet and whatnot will not make a move against them. So my experience tells me that there are probably quiet discussions going on between the Joint Staff and the Vice President's office about contingency planning in the event that the president goes off the rails.
Okay, so
the trouble is,
yep.
The trouble is that it's so heavily partisan.
Yes.
Mike Pompeo, who would be involved in those discussions, quite frankly, I don't think he can be trusted to understand the gravity of the situation. I'm not so sure about Pence either. But we should start with the nuclear codes, because you simply do not know what this fellow's thinking. Now, when
particularly
you
if you've got that military brass that you've identified, that may be a persuasive deterrent. Wow, getting into that, relying on military brass to be a deterrent. Maybe, if they are incapacitated, as you have detailed there, they're in quarantine to protect their own abilities to, the risks of spreading and their own dangers of acquiring. So there's no longer the reliance and the stability of the argument coming back from the military brass relating to those nuclear codes, or indeed any other kind of thing. So I guess that's exposing that risk that you're talking about. And I take your point with Pompeo. Let's have a quick look at this juncture at the latest polls that are starting to come out. And this is one from CNN. I'll just kick that running here, Paul, and just see what the effect is on the polls with this particular thing with Donald Trump coming through this COVID positive and going back into the White House.
CNN's chief national correspondent, John King. He's at the Magic Wall. John?
Don, 4 weeks from tonight, we will be counting the votes. A lot can change in 4 weeks, but right now, Joe Biden has a lead that is growing and that, frankly, is quite overwhelming. Let's take a look at our new poll, and the headline number is this. This is a wow, the largest lead of the race for Joe Biden. 57% for the Democrat, the former vice president, 41% for President Trump. A 16-point spread. Big anyway, all the more important because Joe Biden is so well above 50%. That's your goal in politics, get above 50. Donald Trump getting.
And I'll just keep it running, Paul, because what it's coming up to are the values of which people are actually giving an indication of where they are.
On the big issues. Look at the gaps here. Look at the gaps, not just the lead, but the gap. Who can best handle racial inequality? Wow. Who can best handle the #1 issue in the country right now? Joe Biden, more than 20 points. Who's better to handle your health care? 20 points. Crime and safety. The president's tried to make law and order a big issue. A big advantage, 12 points for Joe Biden. Even the economy, the two candidates essentially split there, a slight edge for Biden. That's essentially a statistical tie. When it comes to the issues that matter to voters, a big edge for Joe Biden.
There you go with that. Biden's well ahead on the issues as well. Just while we're at it, I'll just pull in Nat Silver's kind of evaluation, the front end of it. Encourage people who are interested in this kind of thing to check him out.
Here in video form. If you've been following our model, you know that Joe Biden has been gaining ground. As we're recording this, he has an 83% chance to win the Electoral College versus 17% for President Trump. That is Biden's highest figure on the year. We also project him with a big margin of error to win the popular vote by around 7.5 points, which would be about the same margin that Obama beat McCain by in 2008. So something we would consider probably a borderline landslide.
Yeah. So getting back to those points, then once again, I would encourage people to check out Nat Silver's evaluations and analysis on such things, Paul. But it looks like, sorry, I should say too that Nat Silver actually did basically a description, and it was quite revealing. He's saying on the basis of probabilities that Trump's still in there, and I know that that's one of the concerns that you had before we went to air. You were saying, you'll be more satisfied on the outcome on the night when you see the actual figures coming in, or words to that effect. What Nat Silver was saying is it's still there's a minor but a slim probability that Trump could pull this off. He's saying it's like playing Russian roulette. You've got a revolver, the chambers are empty but for one, so you've got 6-1. And he says that's basically where Trump is on this particular thing as far as being able to pull this election off. And then there's the other things that you've alluded to in past episodes where you're saying about Trump's intention to elongate out the delegitimizing of the United States election. Perhaps we could pick up on that point and have a discussion around that point. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll accept the results the night of the election simply because Trump still has several arrows in his quiver that he can use to not only challenge the legitimacy of the election, that's already going on,
yeah,
but also to contest it. If you think about the role of Republican governors and legislatures in determining who the electors will be,
yeah,
and the fact that constitutionally Trump can actually, with his allies, can pick and choose electors regardless of the popular will of the states, then we have the chances of a heavily disputed election that looks like 50-50 when it comes to the Electoral College. Now, one would hope not in the event of a landslide, but let's be very clear about this. And especially in light of his diagnosis with COVID, and then the whole circus show that was the trip to the hospital and the return, is that this election, for all the talk about cultural wars, you mentioned law and order, for all the religious overtones and his courting evangelicals via the Supreme Court nomination and the like, the hard fact is that this election is a referendum on competence, on institutional and personal competence in high places.
So a test on competence, and that's where Biden is getting a huge lead on all of those values that figure into that particular equation, yeah?
Yeah, for two reasons. The first is the utter incompetence of the Trump administration on virtually all fronts.
Yeah.
And I'll just, one little aside on that. You may remember, this is before we started doing these broadcasts, that when Trump came in, people said, well, his golden moment was the first 6 months of his administration because he had competent people surrounding him. I mean, he had Steve Bannon, even though I'm not a fan of Steve Bannon.
Yeah.
He had James Mathis.
Yes.
He had people who knew what they were doing. Rex Tillerson was the Secretary of State.
And he's burned them off over the years, hasn't he?
Exactly. And what's happened is he's replaced them increasingly with increasingly mediocre people. And the word in Washington from about 18 months ago is that no one who was really interested in a career within the Beltway wanted to touch this White House. And so he is surrounded by mediocrity, to include his personal physician, this Navy commander, who has been promoted way out of station. Normally, the White House doctor is a captain, what they call an 06, a guy who's usually driving a ship. This guy is relatively junior. He's an osteopath. He's not a coronary expert. He's not a trauma surgeon. So the incompetence factor in the White House is the first main reason why Biden is showing so well on all of those measures that John King pulled up. The second one is that Biden has a proven track record. And sure, he has a lot of baggage dating back to the 70s. And sure, he's made a lot of mistakes along the way. But it's pretty clear that he's learned, both from his successes and his mistakes. And in his roles as senator and vice president, he's been privy to some heavy-duty decision-making. And so one thing you cannot accuse Biden of, unless you're going to go down the path of saying he's doddering and all of that, is that he's incompetent. Quite to the contrary. And you can be assured that the team that he's going to bring around him is going to be first rate. Now, we may say, well, there'll be retreads from the Obama administration and what have you. Well, I'll tell you what, at this point, I'll take it.
You'll take
because,
that. Yeah. I get
I mean,
your
I don't
point.
like
because
a lot of,
because
I'm not a
the status
big
quo
fan.
is far from competent on many
Exactly.
levels, and the American public, the voting public, seems to be responding to that. So Trump's jab at Joe Biden is Sleepy Joe, and this type of thing, and he's going for the outer look there. You're saying no, look at the competence that the guy is represented in some ways. I think in previous episodes you've labelled him as a corporate Democrat. Do you see that he will only look after their interests, or do you see it as a more robust fixing of the wrecking ball kind of tactics that have gone on in the previous 4 years?
Well, I mean, he's going to have a lot on his plate in the event that he wins. But, one thing that's been interesting, and I was not a great fan of Biden, throughout his career.
I remember you weren't a fan of Biden at that time and when he was VP, yeah?
No, because he did represent that sort of Clintonite corporate part of the Democratic Party. But I will say this, he learns from his mistakes. He's a very savvy creature, and so he's not going to abandon the left wing of the Democratic Party. He understands he needs them, and in fact, the United States needs some of the policies that were first advocated by the likes of Bernie Sanders.
Well, let's look at pick up that point, and it's a very big one. Can he actually satisfy the wants of the Bernie Sanders section of the Democratic Party? I mean, you see, I've watched a few things with Bernie Sanders in the last week, and he is really rallying. A similar kind of call to what you were talking about there. He's rallying his people to get rid of Trump. Don't be complacent. Don't not vote, but get in there, get Biden in just to get this guy out. And it seems like that's been the tactic in many respects. And if we're looking from afar here, it seems like it's been working in a big way. If we do a quick jump across to the US, is in some ways appears on the global stage to be dead in the water, and I think that's a phrase of which you've put there in different things. So as a global player, is the United States going to be no longer relevant for a time? And in this 4-week period that we're in at the moment, this is beyond lame duck type of situation. What are the adversaries of the United States? Those that have their own interests. We're talking Russia, we're talking the People's Republic of China, and we're talking other middle powers like we underscored in the last episode last week. What do you believe is going to be happening in the next 4 weeks in that kind of frame?
Well, let me put my my geopolitical and strategic analyst hat on and say that when I talk to people who are interested in, let's say, investing in the United States, who are concerned about the political risks involved with putting money into the United States economy right now, I tell them to sit tight. I said, look, you've got to wait out this election period, because if Trump wins, then you know that he will continue the same course. You can try to curry favor with him. You proceed the way you would if everything was stable and normal right now. On the other hand, if he loses the election, even if it's contested, you can be assured that Joe Biden is going to reverse a lot of his signature policies, both at home and abroad. So why put money, effort, including diplomatic capital, into this administration when, in your words, it's beyond a lame duck? I mean, we've moved into crazy land here. Exactly. So for those looking at the United States as a vehicle of opportunity, I would simply say stand pat, wait until the smoke clears, and then make your decisions. Now,
but the United States adversaries are not going to do that, are they?
No, and that's the very good point. Well, I would say this too. I mean, let's just use our small little country here.
Yep.
My advice to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade in New Zealand is just go about your routine diplomatic business. Don't make any moves. Don't make any challenges to the Trump administration right now, because they're probably going to be gone in 4 months. But don't do anything that would provoke the ire of this irrational president and his minions in the State Department. Now, adversaries are a different thing. I could foresee a number of scenarios where countries unencumbered by the concern about the U.S. weighing in on some international issue will make a move to settle disputes that otherwise the United States would be interested in mediating. And worse yet, I can see countries that would press an advantage militarily or diplomatically because the United States appears to be paralyzed. Say, for example, let's say that the PRC made an even more aggressive move into Vietnam's exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea.
And Vietnam's hardwired up too, isn't it? You know, in that respect.
It is, and it's very clear that there are gas and other fossil fuel deposits on the seabed in the South China Sea within Vietnam's so-called EEZ. Yep. The Chinese claim them and have been aggressive in moving their survey boats with patrol boats into Vietnamese waters. Well, what happens if a shooting conflict breaks out and it is not limited to just a couple of boats 25 miles off Vietnam's shores? What if it actually escalates? No one can be sure that the United States will respond at all, much less respond appropriately. You know, with Trump operating the way he is, he may be so concerned that it could derail a future trade deal with China.
I was just going to say that. His instincts would be get around the table and do a deal, whatever that deal would be. Yeah.
Yeah, except that, you know, by international law, and certainly in the eyes of Vietnam's neighbors around the South China Sea basin, there is no deal to be made. It's their territorial waters.
That's very
clear.
Yeah.
You know, the Chinese have been ruled against. I mean, their claims in the South China Sea have been deemed illegal. Yet, they're there. And the United States is not. And we've seen this in the Caucasus very recently. The United States is conspicuous by its absence from this conflict between Azerbaijan and Albania, which has the Turks and the Russians as the main interlocutors from outside the region. We see it in the Middle East, again, where Russia is playing an increasing role. And so if a country sees an advantage in the window of opportunity presented between today and January 20th, 2021, not just the election, but Inauguration Day, they may well make a move. And I'm not entirely certain that the United States is in any position to respond. And if the United States doesn't respond, unfortunately, I don't think that anyone else will pick up the mantle. Not the UK, not France, not Germany, not Australia. They simply won't do it. The U.S. has to lead the charge there.
I'll put something to you here. The situation that the United States finds itself in now, with domestic violence, there's racial and clashes. The Black Lives Matter movement really is obviously there beyond just black Americans, but right across society, where they're saying this is intolerable. We will not tolerate this anymore. The chaos with the white militia groups being armed, threatening, etc., etc. The retaliatory responses from other people that feel that they're defending themselves against that. These are the impressions that you get from outside of the United States. Then there is the financial situations. Then there's the COVID situation. Then you've got an erratic president that seems to be trying to look like he's the tough guy. The question is this what Vladimir Putin was hoping for 4 years ago?
Oh, he couldn't have dreamed that it would come to this. I use the parallel when Osama bin Laden orchestrated the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. He couldn't imagine that as many planes would get through, right? The assumption was there would be air defenses that could thwart those attacks, but he couldn't imagine that 3 out of 4 planes would get to their targets, and then as a bonus that the World Trade Center buildings would fall down. That was, he did not expect that. Well, Putin certainly wanted to defeat Hillary Clinton. He wanted to damage her. I'm not entirely sure that he thought that Trump would win, but that he would damage her enough that she would be picking up the pieces rather than confront him. Instead, he gets a win, and perhaps because there's some history between Putin and Trump that has yet to be revealed, he has leverage on the guy, or at least understands that Trump admires authoritarians and despises Democrats. And so right now, this is all gravy. I mean, this is icing on that cake, and he'll push hard to influence the elections in Russia's favor. Quite frankly, in the world of international politics, if you can get away with it, you'll do it. Absent any superior morality, and Putin is a master at that. So he will do his darndest, but I can tell you this. If Biden wins and the victory is accepted, he's going to change his tune pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Because he won't have if Trump isn't his puppet, someone who is as malleable as Trump in the White Office come January 21st, 2021.
At best, agreeable to some of the wants of what has been a United States foe for all of those years. In future episodes, it'll be really good within the space we're in prior to the United States elections to have a look at Biden, see what we can expect from Biden, go deeper on him to see whether or not he is going to engage that multilateral apparatuses around the world, the WHO, for example, the United Nations, whether or not he is the kind of guy that foreign policy would be one where he recognises and accepts the Security Council at the United Nations requires reform, particularly in the veto areas. All of this kind of thing would be interesting to get ahead of, perhaps, if he is looking like he is almost the presumptive president of the United States coming, albeit from the vote in 4 weeks' time. So on those notes, Paul, thanks again for joining our wonderful joint venture here, the A View from Afar, and I look forward to coming with Paul to bring this to you all, those who are watching, in 1 week's time. Thank you for your attendance. Take care out there. All the best. Thank you, Paul.
Cheers.